deepening conflict between the US and Brazil over the prosecution of former President Jair Bolsonaro. US President Trump threatens 50% tariffs. Unacceptable blackmail, says Brazil's President Lula da Silva. So, what's next? And who stands to win or lose? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Adrian Finighan. A gringo will not give orders to this president. The words of Brazil's leader, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, directed at US President Donald Trump and at supporters. The deepening dispute between Brazil and the US centers on Trump's attempt to stop the prosecution of former President Jair Bolsonaro. Trump's far-right ally is accused of attempting a coup after losing an election to Lula in 2022. But far from bowing to Trump's threats, Brazil's Supreme Court has instead heaped more pressure on Bolsonaro, ordering him to wear an electronic tag to stop him leaving the country. The US president's actions have also been widely criticized in Brazil across political lines, boosting support, it seems, for leftist President Lula. So where is this dispute going? Will either side back down? And what are the political and economic consequences? We'll put all of that to our guests in just a few moments. But first, a report from Finighan.
US President Donald Trump has imposed tariffs on friend and foe alike. He says he's trying to make trade relationships more fair, but when it comes to Brazil, there's a political edge. He's tied the levies directly to what he says is the unfair prosecution of former President Jair Bolsonaro.
He loves the country and he fought hard for those people, and they want to put him in jail. And I think that's a witch hunt, and I think it's very unfortunate. And nobody's happy with what Brazil is doing because Bolsonaro was a respected president.
President Trump is proposing a tariff of 50% on Brazil, far higher than on most other nations. He's also placing travel bans on members of the judiciary. Brazil's current president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, accuses the US of interfering in domestic politics.
What happened was an unacceptable blackmail in the form of threats to Brazilian institutions. Trying to interfere in Brazilian justice is a serious attack on national sovereignty.
Bolsonaro took office in January 2019, but lost his bid for re-election in 2022 to Lula da Silva. He refused to concede defeat. Outbreaks of violence followed, and his supporters stormed federal buildings in early 2023. Bolsonaro was later accused of plotting a coup to overturn the election results. He denies this, saying the vote was stolen and his prosecution is a witch hunt.
There's nothing concrete there. The federal police themselves didn't pin me on January the 8th. The Attorney General's office went beyond what it saw in the investigation. There's no proof of anything. A coup on a Sunday. A coup without armed forces, without weapons.
On Friday, police raided Bolsonaro's home in Brasilia. The Supreme Court has ordered him to wear an ankle monitor and barred him from contact with foreign embassies. Brazil's justice system appears unlikely to bend to President Trump's will, raising the prospect of a lasting rift between the US and Latin America's biggest economy. Finighan, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. Graziella Testa joins us from Brasilia. She's professor at the Getulio Vargas Foundation think tank and specialises in public policy. From Sao Paulo, we're joined by Vinicius Rodrigues Vieira, a professor at the Armando Alvares Penteado Foundation, who specialises in economics and international relations. And Michael Shifter is Senior Fellow at the Inter-American Dialogue, a political and policy forum based on Western Hemisphere affairs. He joins us from Washington, D.C. A warm welcome to you all. Graziella, let's start with you. President Lula, as we heard, says that trying to interfere with Brazilian justice is a serious attack on national sovereignty. He's right, of course. But is that what President Trump is doing?
I'm pretty sure it is. He is allowed, and he should go for international actors if he thinks he's being held some kind of injustice. That's his right, but he should go for other kinds of institutions and not other sovereignty countries. And it's not United States business to say what the judiciary system of Brazil should do. And if the judiciary system of Brazil was actually a party-oriented institution, it wouldn't have also put in jail his main adversary, which is the current president of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. So it's a big deal now in South America. I think all the countries are afraid by now, and we are looking at it with a lot of actually thinking about the future and economics and what it can reflect on the population and on economics, which is already a problem right now.
Okay, we'll talk more about the economic fallout from all of this, the potential economic fallout in just a few moments. But first, Vinicius, both Bolsonaro and Trump say that the case against the former Brazilian president is a witch hunt. Is the trial politically motivated?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. In fact, it's impossible, I think, to detach the judicial side from the political side, not because there is a failure on the Brazilian institutions, in the Brazilian constitutional framework, or even in the Supreme Court, but because Bolsonaro attempted against Brazil's democracy, not just on January the 8th, but also throughout his term. Several times he made it very clear that, if possible, he would subvert the constitutional order. He would close even the Supreme Court. He had this frequent type of speech during his term. In the sense, it's not a witch hunt, therefore, because Brazil's democracy has constitutional tools to, let's say, punish those who attempted against it, remembering that democracy is not just the rule of the majority, but also that should be conducted under a constitutional framework. And our laws here in Brazil, they are very clear in this regard. If there is an attempt against democracy and an attempt against Brazilian sovereignty, actors, regardless if they are on the left or the right, they must be punished. That's a framework very different from what happens in the United States. But even in Mr. Trump's case, we cannot say that there was a witch hunt against him. We understand that as both Bolsonaro and Trump are far-right politicians, they will have, let's say, bounds of solidarity with each other. Nevertheless, it's quite clear that this label witch hunt is just an excuse to keep attempting against constitutional institutions and therefore against democracy itself.
Let's pick that up with Michael. There is, of course, a long history of US interventionism in Latin America, usually in the name of security or economic interests. To what extent, though, is this row personal?
Well, I think it has a very large personal dimension to it, and that's because we have a president, the first president, certainly in my lifetime, of the United States that is really driven by his personal interests, revenge, helping his friends, punishing his enemies, and not really looking in a very realistic and serious way at economic and political consequences. Trump is a very different kind of president, and this is what motivates him. And I think in the Brazilian case, though there may be some geopolitical concerns, it's clear that this is the dominant factor that Trump is motivated by. And I think it has not only drawn criticism rightly from the Brazilian government and many in Brazil, but also in the United States, not only the Democrats and the opposition, but even members of Trump's own party have really been unable to defend this decision of threatening tariffs because of a judicial process that's happening in an independent sovereign country. This is really, I think, even for supporters of Trump, out of bounds and quite embarrassing, if one could sort of judge by some of the comments that we've had. This is really outrageous. And the letter that President Trump wrote to President Lula was really, I think, unprecedented and quite remarkable and shameful, in my view.
Graziella, how much support does Bolsonaro still have in Brazil, are there people who will be cheering on President Trump right now, even if he ultimately ends up hurting them economically?
Yeah, now the electorate in Brazil has this very specific view that a third of the Brazilian electorate supports Bolsonaro. Seems like no matter what, he can't be hurt for almost anything. But there is this irony to the story that one of the main speeches of Bolsonaro is the patriotic saying, like he's very patriotic in opposition to Lula and the other adversaries who would be who wouldn't feel like the nationalism that Bolsonaro is. And the electorate did buy this speech, this ideology of the patriotism. And now the main thing is that Lula appropriated the speech of the patriotism for him. And that's the news flash in Brazil. Some of Bolsonaro supporters and middle voters who wouldn't support Bolsonaro, nor Bolsonaro or Lula, are now identifying Lula as a patriotic. So that's a big favor that Trump and Bolsonaro did to Lula and his possibility of re-election. That it's next year we have elections in Brazil, and now we are not sure what's going to happen. Everything is very open. So Lula got this big help from Trump and from Bolsonaro after all those events, and these patriotic feelings that now the electorate attributes to Lula, and it can be measured by some surveys that were held after all Trump's speech and Lula's response.
Vinicius, has this row boosted Lula's chances of re-election next year? As I understand it, Bolsonaro can't run for president, but how might he seek to influence the election in the Senate, for example?
For instance, Mr. Bolsonaro, although he's not allowed to run for a term, at least in 2026, his suspension of political rights goes until 2030. But he himself, a few days ago, just before all this confusion started with the help of Mr. Trump, he had a clear plan. He outlined that in a speech here in São Paulo, in Avenida Paulista, place of major manifestations, gatherings. He said, let's try to make the majority in the Senate, because the Senate has the power to impeach Supreme Court justices. So the plan of Mr. Bolsonaro was to make a super majority in the Senate, even if his political side loses the presidency. And with that, he would be able to manipulate the decisions taken by the Supreme Court and therefore the Constitution itself, the interpretation of the Constitution itself. Having said that, it seems that Bolsonaro, more than being concerned with the empowerment of the right-wing side of Brazilian politics and even the empowerment of the far right, he's nowadays much more concerned about saving himself from prison. And he can only do that with the help of Mr. Trump now, given that even inside Brazil, he's isolated from the forces that brought him to power, particularly the economic forces. Clearly, entrepreneurs, most of whom will lose lots of money should those sanctions imposed by Mr. Trump against Brazil really go forward, including the 50% tariff. These people, even before Trump's actions, they were no longer willing to support Bolsonaro as a candidate, instead looking for a center-right alternative that at least would not be so explicit as Mr. Bolsonaro was in challenging Brazilian institutions. So to summarize, Mr. Bolsonaro, he may still have a pathway, even if those sanctions are not put forward with the Senate election, in order to reshape Brazilian politics in favor of himself and, of course, of the far-right side of the Brazilian politics.
Michael, where does Bolsonaro's son Eduardo, currently residing in the US, play into all of this? He's reported to be lobbying the Trump administration on his father's behalf. Is he doing anything illegal under Brazilian law? Could he himself run for president next year?
Well, I think he's been obviously very involved with the whole the MAGA movement, the supporters of President Trump here. He was in Mar-a-Lago in Florida the night of the election. He's very close to the vice president and to others and to the president's son. And so I think he is mentioned as a possibility, Bolsonaro's son, Eduardo, or even Bolsonaro's wife. There's a lot of time before the election. A lot of things could happen. The economy is uncertain what's going to happen in Brazil. And I think that would be a huge factor. But I wouldn't rule out that Bolsonaro's son or Bolsonaro's wife or somebody else in his family could be a candidate and could assume the mantle as the head of the movement, of the conservative movement in Brazil. I think that's possible. This has been a gift for Lula, but I think it's not clear how long this will continue, whether this boost is kind of temporary or really this is something that is going to benefit Lula from now until the elections next year.
Yeah, Graziella, Lula's popularity was on the wane before Trump's intervention. What has this row done for his image in the country? Is there a sense of national outrage about all of this?
Absolutely. That's the Michael has an important point. We are not sure if this raise on Lula's popularity is going to be temporary or if it's going to be a permanent speech that it's going to help him with next elections. And there's another important issue here. There is the main name of the right wing who will probably be the more likely to be the adversary of Lula in the next elections. Michael said about Eduardo Bolsonaro, who is desperate to be this candidate, to be the name of the right. There is a more obvious name. That's the wife of Bolsonaro, Michelle Bolsonaro. The recent polls say that she has more vote intentions than Eduardo Bolsonaro. But there is also the governor of São Paulo, Tarcísio, which is the one that the electorate's it's more likely to vote against Lula, and is the one that the Família Bolsonaro has to beat if they want to be one of the family members who will run for president in the next election. So I believe that Eduardo Bolsonaro actions in the United States has this important agenda of looking for be the candidate and looking for the family to continue to be the main name of the right, because Tarcísio Freitas, the governor of São Paulo, is the most, I would say it's the most important name of the right today, because he was an important support in the next municipal elections. His support was very important for the mayors, and that's something that it's been bothering Bolsonaro's family, although Tarcísio Freitas is still theoretically a supporter of the family. We will see if they will remain supporting each other next year when the national elections come.
All right, Vinicius, as Graziella was saying there, and Michael before her, that we don't know whether this boost that Lula has got since Trump's intervention will last. It all depends, I suppose, upon the economy. How might the tariffs, the punitive tariffs that Trump is threatening against Brazil, affect its economy? And how might that play into polling next year?
Well, let me pick up on Graziella's point, particularly concerning the role of the governor of São Paulo, Mr. Tarcísio de Freitas, given that São Paulo is likely to be the state mostly affected by the tariffs should they be imposed. Why that's the case? São Paulo is still the powerhouse of Brazilian economy, of Brazilian industry, accounting for roughly 1/3 of Brazil's GDP. And most industrial exports that goes to the United States, as well as coffee, and orange juice particularly, they come from the state of São Paulo. That's why entrepreneurs who would be willing to support Mr. De Freitas, they now may be shifting towards the center again, which, however, doesn't mean at all that they will be supportive of Mr. Lula. Instead, they may be looking for a third-way candidate, or at least for someone who, notwithstanding potential conservative credentials or even far-right credentials, could present him or herself to the electorate as an alternative to both Bolsonaro and Lula, remembering that not necessarily the poll suggests thus far that although Lula has gained a slightly boost in his popularity, people are willing, particularly from the center, from the political center, to support Lula's re-election. Just to give you a number, roughly 2/3 of the Brazilian electorate, according to a poll that was recently released, they think that neither Bolsonaro or Lula should be candidates, which paves the way to other center-right or right-wing governors to be candidates that are able to succeed Mr. Lula. The big question is, to what extent the Brazilian average voter will feel outraged by the actions of Mr. Trump? I have slightly doubts about that, given that now in Brazil there is a process for which we are going through, in which we are having, let's say, disputing views of our nationality. So I will not be surprised if some people really think that Mr. Trump is actually doing a favor for Brazil as a whole in rescuing the far-right movement from the hands of those who are trying to challenge it.
Michael, given the boost, it may be temporary, as you said, to Lula, to what extent has Trump shot himself in the foot? How much harm could he do to American consumers if he imposes punitive tariffs on staples like coffee and orange juice, and they become much more expensive? Are his threats even real, do you think?
Well, you know, we've seen in the first 6 months of this administration, we've seen this sort of flip-flop constantly on tariffs. And so it's, you know, who knows? It's true that the tariffs that are now in effect are the highest they've been on part of the United States for 80 years. It's also true that in the last report, we saw some effect in terms of inflation, increase in prices of those tariffs. But clearly, if he goes ahead with the 50% and the other threats that he's made for August 1st, it's going to have a significant, huge effect. You mentioned coffee, orange juice, other products as well. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of pushback and pressure on Trump not to go ahead with this, because I think it is going to hurt the United States. It will also hurt Brazil. It'll be detrimental to both economies and to both countries. But this is the way that Trump does foreign policy, through threats, through tariffs. This is his favorite instrument, and already we've seen a lot more than we did in his first term. But he also has pulled back, as we've seen from those threatened on Liberation Day. So, people have given up trying to predict whether he's actually going to go ahead with this threat on August 1st. I think if he does, it will be very, very negative for both economies, and obviously geopolitically for the relationship between Brazil and the United States. And Brazil will deepen its ties, I think, as a result, to China, to India, to Japan, Michael, to other countries as a result of that.
Sorry to interrupt, Michael. We're running out of time, but Graziella, I just wanted you to pick up on what Michael eventually got to there. If President Trump goes ahead with punitive tariffs, will Brazil seek closer ties with other nations, the BRICS nations, of course, that it's a part of, the EU, China, Southeast Asia? It'll just take its business elsewhere.
It will take a while, and it will hurt the economy. I'm pretty sure of that. But there are currently agreements that are being constructed, especially with the European Union. It has already been signed. We are waiting for the Parliament and all the process in the European Union for this open situation in commerce. That it's going to be very, if it's happening, it's going to be be an important ally to Brazil, economically speaking. And of course, the BRICS, who are always, we like to repeat and say that the BRICS agreement, it's mostly an economic agreement. Brazil has been very criticized about the democratic factor in the BRICS, but it is a very successful economic agreement. And it's if Trump has a problem with BRICS, this is an important support to BRICS, and it's throwing Brazil to BRICS even more.
All right, okay. Vinicius, to what extent do you think this is going to come down to a game of brinkmanship, to who blinks first? Do you think Trump is going to be forced to back down?
Well, I think Trump is likely to back down, as Michael was saying, due to pressures coming from U.S. in terms of the staples that are essential for the United States and that come from Brazil. Again, coffee and or juice. However, I think that Mr. Trump will insist as much as possible because he targets Brazil because that's the easiest BRICS to be targeted. And as we all know, BRICS has an anti-dollar agenda. There are de-dollarization plans that are far from taking place, of course. However, Mr. Trump has already an eye on that since even before the beginning of his second term. So that's crucial to think of Mr. Trump not just reacting with the support for Mr. Bolsonaro against Lula himself, but above all, that's against a major geopolitical shift that we are witnessing. Having said that, just very quickly, what Graziella mentioned. Very quickly. Don't think of Brazil supporting authoritarian regimes. Brazil is above all supporting multilateralism that United States and Trump has been jettisoning. And just think of the partnerships with European Union, Canada, that are under discussion nowadays. Thank you.
Michael, I've got about a minute left on the programme. Do you agree with what Vinicius was saying there, that having started it, this is Trump's game to lose?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think we've seen this pattern over and over since January 20th of this year. And so, you know, I think what we've seen is a series of self-inflicted wounds. Look, I think Trump has bullied a lot of people in the United States who have capitulated and bowed to him. I think President Lula is right to say that Trump is the president of the United States. He's not the president of the world. He's not an emperor. And I think he's encountering that other leaders in the world, especially significant countries like Brazil, are not like heads of universities or law firms or others that he's been able to sort of ride roughshod over in the United States. There's a difference. So I think he's learning that. And I think it's going to be a difficult lesson, but I think he's going to have to pull back and he's going to have to adjust.
Many thanks to you all for being with us today. We're out of time. Graziella Testa, Vinicius, Rodrigues, Vieira, and Michael Shifter. And thank you for watching. You can see the programme again at any time by going to the website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, join us at our Facebook page at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can join the conversation on X, our handle there at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here in Doha. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again. Bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.